It's sort of like putting two stray cats in a bag and like seeing which one comes out. There's just
I'd pay to watch that.
There's some people who enjoy that.
That's what every SEC game feels like. I truly have no idea who is going to win a single one of the SEC games left on the schedule.
That's great.
From here to
That's awesome.
I don't feel confident in a single result.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan, and it's LSU week, and the stakes are high. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee will reveal its first rankings of the 2024 season tonight, and it's possible, and even likely, that Alabama will be on it. But just like any midseason rankings, they won't matter, at least if Alabama doesn't walk out of Death Valley with a win on Saturday. And if they manage to do that, they're back in business after an unpredictable season so far. And joining me to break it all down, AL.com college football writer Michael Casagrande and Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. And I want to ask you both this question, but Michael, I'm going to start with you. What's the best Alabama-LSU game that you have ever seen?
I mean, honestly, there have been so many. It's hard not to go back to 2011. I know it wasn't a game that most Alabama fans want to remember for the score, for the way it ended, but it was kind of everything that you would imagine a great college football scene being. I remember the weather was immaculate. It was a beautiful day. It was 2 weeks of buildup. ESPN was there for probably the entire time. Just everything was, all the elements were there. I've never seen, probably the first time I'd ever seen the quad that crowded. It was immaculate. It was 9-6. No one even scored a touchdown. The game felt so huge. So I'd have to go with that one if you were picking one from Bryant-Denny.
I don't think they mind that game as much as they used to. Like you said, just considering what happened later in the season, right? I mean, right. I do think that the diehards out there probably look back and think we should have won it. You know, like it shouldn't have even gone to overtime. They had opportunities, and they did. Definitely. Both teams had opportunities, but I agree. I think that was a great game. Like, in spite of the score, neither team would give an inch. Like, they just didn't want to give an inch. You had two historically great teams on the field at the same time, considering the caliber of talent, guys who would play in the NFL. And you just had these incredible moments that I'm sure a lot of people remember what made up to be an instant classic. And it only deserved a rematch. And it was a one-sided rematch, but I'm glad that the teams at least got another chance to throw haymakers at each other. So I think that's an awesome pick because, like you said, the atmosphere was second to none. I mean, people still look back at that and call that the game of the century, a regular season game that happened in 2011, and people still have that level of reverence for what happened in Tuscaloosa that day. So, Matt, what about you?
Well, we talked about on a previous episode, Ben, that actually I believe I declared in the episode that my favorite Alabama LSU game was 2014, which is a weird one, and a game that went to overtime thanks to some Blake Sims heroics and some really fun and weird play calling by Lane Kiffin, particularly at the end of the game. So that one will always have kind of a special place for me, even though it's different. I was watching it on TV. I was with family, just kind of in a normal setting. Just a very memorable, weird game for me. In terms of other games that had a big personal impact on me, 2012 was my first time seeing a game in Baton Rouge in Tiger Stadium, and it fully lived up to the hype. It was spectacular. The crowd was incredible. A member of the media got kicked out of the press box while I was in there. He was, let's say he was for the home team a little bit too loudly.
And it wasn't me.
It was not Michael. No, it was just such a, I would say it had the feel to me of a lot of the national championship games that I've been at and covered. And other sort of extremely high stakes game. It was high stakes. I mean, I'm trying to remember the specific circumstances, but I feel pretty confident the SEC West championship would have been on the line in that game, given where it was in the season. And that was a pretty good LSU team. But just, I mean, everybody knows. I think if you're any level of Alabama fan, you're familiar with the game-winning play, the screen pass to T.J. Yeldon. It was a spectacular moment, but seeing it in the context of the whole game and being in that stadium and hearing it get deafeningly loud on the previous series, and then to go fully quiet and you could only hear one corner of the stadium. It was just a sensory overload, the whole experience.
Yeah, I was there too, Matt. I was sitting in the stands, and I was sitting in the LSU student section, which was a dangerous place to be if you weren't one of them, right? And it really proved to be the place that you had heard about, right? Like to me, Death Valley, that place under the lights at night, the stakes of that game, it all lived up to the hype. Like, it was an amazing game, and yeah, the like you said, the stakes were high. I mean, Alabama won that game in the fashion that you mentioned, and then they went on to lose their very next game against Texas A&M. That was the Johnny Manziel game, and so the air kind of got let out of the balloon. We know what happened the rest of the season. Alabama recovered and managed to win the national championship, but that rivalry to me peaked in that moment in a lot of ways. I mean, these two teams played in a national championship against each other, but they just went back at it the very next year, and again had like a 15-round slugfest. And to me, that rivalry became the best in college football. I mean, you can take, Big Ten rivalries, even the Iron Bowl and others in the SEC. Like when Saban was peaking at Alabama, and LSU was too in a lot of ways, it just didn't get better. Like you said, in terms of atmosphere, environment, actual college football talent that was on the field, that was synonymous with college football, and so was Death Valley. Right?
Yeah, and Les Miles also should be mentioned. I think he's no longer looked back at as maybe the same level of coach as some of the other elite guys of his era. But even beyond that, LSU had an incredible stretch of coordinators throughout the Saban era that were kind of constantly. I mean, that was a duel in and of itself of these offensive and defensive play callers between Alabama and LSU in all of those games.
I'd say that there are blood rivalries. There's the Alabama-Auburn, there's Tennessee, but this was like, these were talent. This was talent on talent. These were rosters of future NFL stars for years. And that's what I think made this game so competitive, because on the field, the players were probably more rivals in that game than they were against Tennessee, against Auburn. That they played more against them. There was more crossover in that sense nationally with the LSU players. So I think there was more hatred on their side to beat LSU than maybe a Tennessee.
Yeah, I felt that. I mean, it was pretty palpable. I mean, play by play, I mean, hit by hit, like it was real. And I think, Georgia, Alabama kind of supplanted that for a while, but I don't think that, even though the stakes were always incredibly high between those two teams, for me, just like watching both of them in my adulthood, I think Alabama LSU was just that much more special for a lot of different reasons. But I mean, one of them was the X factor of Death Valley, right? And Alabama had to go in there and survive. And I wanted to ask you guys about that place, right? Like, LSU has beaten Alabama in Baton Rouge just twice since 2008. Alabama beat them 5 straight times in Death Valley until Brian Kelly finally nipped them in overtime in 2022. And again, I've been in that stadium at night. It lived up to the hype. Everyone says it's the hardest place to play. I mean, Les Miles famously said it's where dreams go to die. But what do y'all think? Matt, is Tiger Stadium at night under the lights, is it the real deal, or is it just a myth considering the success that Alabama has had there?
I think Alabama's more the exception there. I think LSU, and here's what I will say too. I think LSU, sometimes we judge the hype of certain things based only on the win-loss result. And obviously, that is how you should judge college football teams ultimately, but it lacks nuance. That would be like saying Alabama has easily won the last 4 Iron Bowls, so it must not be hard to play in Jordan-Hare Stadium. We all know that's not what happened, and that's not an accurate portrayal of how things have gone. I mean, the 2012 game we just mentioned, 2014 was a really tough one. 2017 was a really tough one for Alabama.
2016.
Sorry, 2016 is where Jalen Hurts basically had to break the scoreless tie near the end of the game.
It was 0-0 going to the fourth quarter.
Yeah, so it's been tough for Alabama to win in Baton Rouge, and just because they did do it doesn't mean that it wasn't difficult. And I would say if there's anything about the myth of it that is maybe misleading, it's the idea that somehow it's substantially worse at night. And I think the only reason we think that is because there's not enough data on what it's like during the daytime, because they basically never have to play during the day. And not to sound like Lane Kiffin here, that's maybe the most sort of nefarious thing if you're an Alabama fan about LSU is, they're automatically going to get a night game whenever they want one.
Well, and it's just kind of the math. I mean, you spend all day tailgating, and LSU tailgates better than anybody else. You have 10 beers is more than
they're well supplied, let's say.
Yeah.
They're so well supplied. I remember when they would score touchdowns, they would just throw their full cups of drinks into the air and like down the student section. They didn't care. They were just, and the deafening noise of like when they make a big play or score, especially against a team like Alabama. Like I said, man, it is intimidating. You're just like you're in the lion's den, seriously. Like, and it's just like, oh God, I don't think we're going to get out of here alive.
It felt like the Roman Coliseum. What people talk about the Roman Coliseum in modern times. They used to bring the tiger. I mean, I remember the first few times I was there, they brought the tiger around in the cage, and like Marcel Darius talked about, barking at the tiger, and like, it's like insane stuff. That you
Bad
think about.
idea.
Yeah, like they brought a live tiger around with meat in the trailer. Like,
good Lord, I don't know if I'll ever go back. So Michael, while Alabama's defense, they've seen peaks and valleys this year. I mean, you heard early on about the swarm D, but then you had offenses carve them up, and so it's just been up and down, ebbs and flows. But, other than Carson Beck, who obviously has a bad habit of turning the ball over this year, I don't know that they've faced a quarterback with the arm talent, the ability of Garrett Nussmeier with respect to Diego Pavia, with Nico Iamaleava. But there have been games against Western Kentucky, South Florida, Wisconsin, South Carolina, where receivers have gotten open, but the quarterbacks haven't made the throws. Nussmeier can make the throws. How do you see him challenging Alabama's secondary on Saturday?
No, it's interesting. When you look at LSU's offense, I think they're going to need that. They're going to need to do that because they're pretty one-dimensional. For an LSU team, this is an LSU offense that was always at least built around the run, throw second. I think Nussmeier threw 50 times against Texas A&M, threw 3 interceptions in that game. I think they averaged 1 yard per rush in that game. I think 23 carries, 24 yards. So their ground game is not there. So, I mean, that's if you become one-dimensional, it's easier to beat a team like that. They have great receivers. I think Lacey. They have Aaron Anderson, who was the former Alabama receiver, played there for a season. New Orleans guy who went home, has the second most yards, I think, in their receiving game. So they have weapons, they have talent there. Alabama's defense respected enough the ground game. If they don't have the ground game to counter it, then it's going to be a little bit easier to defend that.
Yeah, and I mean, Alabama has looked vulnerable at times, and Nussmeier is not exactly like a running quarterback, which any defense would struggle with. So you're right. I mean, if they're one-dimensional, Alabama they have proven to play the run fairly well, especially if a team is one-dimensional. I mean, look at Missouri. I mean, they didn't have their leading rusher in that game, but they had a hobbled starting quarterback. And so, they weren't even one-dimensional at that point. And so that's why you saw a shutout on Saturday. But I think Nussmeier is going to challenge them in a lot of ways. Again, if you've got a quarterback who can hit that open receiver where other quarterbacks have not been able to against a vulnerable Alabama secondary, especially a banged-up Alabama secondary, because Keon Sabb's not going to play in this game. Bray Hubbard has stepped up, and he looked good against Missouri. But again, you're talking about an offense who didn't have all of their weapons.
Right.
By all accounts, I mean, this LSU offense is going to have all of their weapons, and they're going to give Alabama everything that they want. Now, Matt, I mean, Jalen Milroe had a career game against LSU last year. I mean, he outdueled eventual Heisman winner Jaden Daniels, of course, partially because Daniels got knocked out of the game by Dallas Turner at one point. But Milroe was electric. He threw it well. He ran it well. He dominated the game. He looked like the best college football player in the country that night. it's been a minute since we've seen that version of Milroe when his scrambling instincts are there. I mean, he carved them up on the ground with 155 yards. He had 4 rushing touchdowns in that game. LSU struggles with running quarterbacks. Do you think Jalen Milroe can have similar success as he did last year? I mean, did we see enough in the Missouri game that reassured us about him leading this offense this season after the struggles he had against Vandy and Tennessee?
I think the opportunity is going to be there. I think if you look at what Texas A&M did to LSU, the backup quarterback Reed was able to really hurt LSU by being mobile and moving around in the pocket and having some design run plays. Jalen Milroe obviously has the raw physical ability to do that. We have not seen him look comfortable running the ball in a few weeks. And I think he got back to a little bit of it against Missouri. It was still a little bit rusty looking, but ultimately, I think it's pretty clear that the tools are there. And again, I still don't quite know how to attribute Milroe's regression this season, but especially watching that Missouri game, I don't necessarily think there is any kind of physical issue going on. So the question is, I really do think Alabama's offensive staff is going to have to call a game that puts Milroe in position to take advantage of those gifts and to take advantage of the things LSU apparently is not particularly good at, which is dealing with running quarterbacks. In the meantime, I think you're starting to see the Alabama receiving core maybe get a little bit more comfortable. I think Kendrick Law coming back maybe had something to do with that. I think we're starting to see Jeremy Bernard get a little more confident out there and get open more. It's not all the Ryan Williams show anymore. So there is a multifaceted attack to be made by this Alabama offense. I think the question is, can they put it all together? Can they get off to a quick start, which is something they have not done since the Georgia game?
Michael, I mean, listen, there's been too much speculation on Jalen Milroe, and there haven't been answers. So there's no point in saying, hey, is there something mentally off with Jalen? Or, hey, is Jalen hiding an injury? Are they not disclosing something? That's neither here nor there. I mean, we have to just judge what we see on the field. Do you see a regression with Jalen Milroe right now? Like, do you think that he is a worse quarterback than he was last year? Do you think he's better than he was last year in some ways? Like, what version do you think we get on Saturday?
Well, it's hard to say that the Jalen Milroe you saw against South Carolina, against Tennessee, was the same Jalen Milroe you saw against Georgia or at Wisconsin. There was definitely a regression, whether it was defensive schemes, figuring them out. They're doing a better job with spies, keeping an eye on him to keep him out of scramble territory. But they haven't been running as many of those planned runs with him where he has a lead blocker out in front. You imagine you'd see some of that against an LSU defense this week. The play calling has changed. So I think it definitely, you had that week off. They did a pretty good job with that week off before the Georgia game, the previous bye week. So this is a time, if this is a staff full of offensive minds and can scheme up something good, this is that test. This is that moment where you're going to see how good of a coaching staff this is.
Yeah, and Alabama has weapons, right? And Jalen Milroe, to his credit, he spreads the ball around. He finds different receivers in every game that he plays. I mean, you did have these games where he targets, Ryan Williams 30 times, but I mean, you've got Prentice getting targets. You've got Law getting touches. You've got all these players, but I think the team is obviously better when you have these two talented running backs in Justice Haynes and Jam Miller carrying the ball. And I mean, I don't think that it's like Jalen Milroe, again, like when the ball is in his hands, you should be confident just given the level of talent, the level of speed that he possesses. But I don't think he should be taking the hits that he takes sometimes. And again, like these guys in the backfield, they're built for that. They're talented. And when they get the ball, they make things happen. So here's hoping that they get more touches. But Matt, I mean, Brian Kelly is such an interesting character in the SEC now. Like for some, he seemed kind of like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole at LSU, just kind of a weird fit in Baton Rouge. But look, he's undoubtedly a successful college football coach. I mean, he took Notre Dame to the BCS championship. He got them to the playoff twice. He won the SEC West and beat Alabama in his first season as LSU coach. I mean, he coached a Heisman winner last year. And if he beats Alabama this week, they may get back to the playoffs. So What is on the line for Brian Kelly on Saturday?
I think he's still very much trying to find his identity in this program. I think he's trying to figure out what works at LSU, which is a very different set of things than what worked at Notre Dame. And, you know, I am not super in tune with the LSU fan base and how they feel about this guy at this point. I think probably like a lot of SEC fan bases, it's a week to week thing, and they feel better about you after you win. I think probably that win over Ole Miss helped him a lot with that fan base, and then to go out and lose to Texas A&M the way they did was probably very frustrating. So it still feels very wait and see to me. It still feels like nobody's quite sure about each other when it comes to that arrangement, and he has been able to accomplish some impressive things at LSU. That said, you're at LSU. You have a level of resources that probably puts you in the top 15 programs in college football. You should be accomplishing some things. I would say probably in Brian Kelly's time there, with the understanding that he's new and that it takes time to get things going, they have underachieved as a program given how they have been in the 21st century so far. I'm not saying it's time to start calling for his head, but I do think they're waiting to see him actually do something instead of these sort of little small accomplishments along the way that we mentioned. A win against Alabama here, a Heisman Trophy is nice, but that's not what they play for at LSU. They're trying to get back into the national championship discussion, and they haven't been in it since he's been there.
That's the thing with him is like you list all these accomplishments, you call him small, and then you're like he has something to prove. It's hard to what is success? That's kind of what I've been asking since January for what is Kalen DeBoer? What is success for him? What is success for Brian Kelly? He's had these big moments, and he's also on the chopping block every other week. So,
and why do you leave Notre Dame to go to LSU? It's probably to try to win a national championship. He had already done just about everything else at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm no Brian Kelly defender. I'm just saying it's just kind of funny. It's like the dichotomy of him. It's like you do a lot of great things, but not good enough.
Nope.
Oof, brutal. I mean, that's a good transition though, because I mean, entering this season, there appeared to be a feeling that fans would give Kalen DeBoer some grace in his first season, right? Like there would be growing pains in spite of what he was inheriting, but then he beats Georgia and they're back to thinking national championship. What growing pains? But then he loses to Vandy and suddenly the conversation is Kalen DeBoer the man for the job, right? Like, does he get the culture? Michael, does DeBoer deserve grace? Like, how does that work? Or like when you're making $10 million a year to do this, is it fair to put a coach under the microscope in his first season?
Yeah, no, it's what we've been talking about and thinking about the entire offseason, the entire time. What's going to happen? When's the honeymoon going to end? And to think that it was you beat Georgia, and beating Georgia might have been the worst thing that happened to him in that sense of you set him up for the fall. You come behind him and you sweep the legs with Vanderbilt. But no, I think it was always unrealistic to think that it was just plug and play, that it was just going to seamlessly transition from Nick Saban, and the roster turnover was real. There were a lot of players. There's a big chunk of that roster that is not back. Certainly, a lot of big pieces and big names were back, but to think that they were going to be undefeated right now, just completely uninterrupted by such a huge change, entire staff, the whole program, the whole building is different. It was unrealistic, but I think it goes back to Vanderbilt. And that name on the jersey, as opposed to if you just lose a close game at Tennessee, people aren't going to love it, but they're not going to hate it to the same extent. So it's a big. This weekend is huge for him. He can really get people off his back. No one's talking about T-shirts if he beats LSU in Baton Rouge.
I will say, and I agree with everything Michael just said, but all of that said, the captain of a ship doesn't get to say, I deserve calm seas. And the fans getting upset with you for anything, it just, and to use Nick Saban's favorite phrase. It just is what it is. That is the nature of the job. You can't control it in any way, and you might as well just accept it as a force of nature. That there are certain things that if they happen, the grace, the honeymoon, whatever you want to call it, it's out the window, and you just have to find a way to navigate it. And
I think he has. I think he understands it at least. I don't think he's in any way like upset.
No, I mean, he doesn't seem panicky about it.
How would you know?
He doesn't seem anything about it, is what I was going to say. Yeah, he just isn't going to give you any kind of feedback during the season, at least not this version of Kalen DeBoer. And maybe over time, he starts to see that it's advantageous of him to learn how to communicate to this fan base in a different way. But right now, it's not something he's focused on.
If you don't throw your food after a loss, then you're not upset. You're not upset about it. He's too Jalen Hurts. He's got that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, but, surely he knew what he was getting into, right? Like when it comes to, surely he did his own research, right? Like, I mean, Alabama is a unique place. I mean, 90,000 plus people at an 8A game in Nick Saban's first season, that's like a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways. When there's 90,000 people filling up a stadium for a spring game, that brings expectations. They're all there because they think they're back. They're going to be national championships. Saban was obviously able to deliver, and he helped establish that tone, but you got to deliver like when you go anywhere, right? I mean, any college football coach can get fired wherever they go. There are expectations wherever you go. We just understand what those expectations are in Tuscaloosa. And I think and hope DeBoer understands what they are. So
there's knowing it, there's researching it and hearing about it. And then there's like living it. Yeah. Some places they play college football, and at Alabama, Kalen DeBoer is living it very hard.
Michael, you had an interesting column recently where you said, here's what's wrong with the college football playoff. You used the 10-foot wall, 11-foot ladder analogy. And, that no matter how much you expand the field, you're always going to leave somebody out. Like when there was a third, where there was a third team in the BCS system, right? Like there was a fifth team in the original 4-team format of the playoff, and there will be a 13th team this year and so on, right? I mean, even if you're talking about the NCAA tournament with 68 teams, there's always going to be a 69th team trying to get in. But with the BCS, as you write, it was all mathematical. There was no committee. Alabama has gotten the benefit of the doubt from the committee before during this era. Isn't it a little strange now that Alabama could be that 13th team trying to sort of like worm their way into the college football playoff now?
Yeah, I guess maybe they have Nick Saban politicking on TV more now than he did when he would do that. Miss the SEC championship, he'd be on TV riding the committee. But yeah,
how will the Big Ten media members handle it? Well, they'll be in absolute shambles.
Well, that's what makes it fun. It's because it's kind of a mystery. We don't know how this is all going to work out. We've never had this in real life. And my point in that column was there's just not enough transparency with the committee and showing your math. We don't know how they're doing anything. They won't even tell us which metric they use for the strength of schedule, or won't even show us like anything. At least the NCAA basketball, for as flawed as that is, they give you the net rankings and they give you some sort of like guide star to what they're looking at, as opposed to these 13 people in a suburban Dallas hotel boardroom cooking up something without any sunshine. And it's one thing when it's 4 teams, but when you're widening that net and you have a lot more angry people who are coming after you, and you're still showing the same lack of transparency. So that was my point with that.
Can you explain KenPom, Michael, real quick, and how that works?
It is the basketball nerd, basketball writer, the greatest thing on earth to all of us. We don't even know what his formula is, but for whatever reason, that is the gospel of who is the best basketball. There's no KenPom for football.
It's like on the back of the Marvel superhero cards where it tells you how.
What do you think of this analogy, Michael?
Who could beat who?
What do you think of this analogy?
Yeah, I'll get my Marvel gift cards out and we'll start comparing. It was rookie season.
Well, hey Matt, I mean, in that same column, Michael pointed at things like preseason number 1, Georgia looked bad enough to fall behind 28-0 at Alabama, but good enough to take a 23 to nothing halftime lead against then number 1 Texas. I mean, Vandy beats Alabama and Auburn. Texas A&M, they look like world beaters one week and then get dominated by South Carolina the next. I mean, people are rightly talking about parity in college football this year. I mean, do you see it that way? Like, is there actual parity? I mean, it's likely that many of the usual suspects make it to the end, even in this expanded college football playoff. But everyone does seem to sort of like, they seem like they're beating each other up a little bit along the way. Like, do you think that this is helping the college football product the way that they have expanded this field?
I don't know is the answer as to whether it is helping the college football product. I mean, the numbers right now are very good. People are watching college football. And despite what people used to say when there were a small number of dominating programs, people used to watch then too. They used to say it was bad for the sport and that it was boring, but they watched it in very large numbers. I think parity implies a certain amount of consistent quality between the teams, and as though everybody is sort of at a, let's say, a 7 or an 8 every week out of 10. That's not really what's happening here. It feels like what it is that nobody is consistent enough from week to week to ever be dependable enough to count on what their results are going to be. So,
which makes it interesting.
It is interesting for sure. In some ways, it makes it feel to me as if there aren't any programs with a clear identity, because Alabama and Georgia being really good was part of what we knew about college football. They were the characters in the story. And I'm not saying that they're not interesting characters this year, but it's hard to put your finger on what they are and what their identity is. I mean, Georgia has looked, as you said, spectacular at times. And then there are other weeks where it looks like, for example, they don't have a great quarterback that's capable of winning a championship. I guess that's fun to watch if you're sort of a neutral observer, but it feels different to me than, let's say going back into the sort of middle of the Saban era, where there were Tim Tebow's and Aaron Murray's and these players who were consistently very good at what they did and didn't really lose games because they just played wildly differently one week than they did the previous week.
So it was very in the box. It was you knew it was going to happen. That's a lot of fun. You don't you want to watch a game and know exactly how it's going to end?
Matchup. I think it's the matchups of it that became fun. Is once we know what these teams are, what is it going to look like when you put them up against each other? And now it's sort of like putting two stray cats in a bag and like seeing which one comes out. There's just
I'd pay to watch that.
There's some people who enjoy that.
It's what every SEC game feels like. I truly have no idea who is going to win a single one of the SEC games left on the schedule.
That's great. That's awesome.
I don't feel confident in a single result.
Your safe space is gone. You thought you had it all figured out. Your tent poles of like, this is going to happen. At least this is going to happen. Then once that's gone, you know, Matt lost his favorite stuffed animal, and now he doesn't know. Well, I guess. I mean, I guess it's funny because I'm seeing some of this through the lens of, I have a son who really just started paying attention to college football in the last couple of years, and he's trying to watch this show, which is what it is, and figure out what's the story. How do I make sense of this? And it's like, he's like, wait, why did that happen? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know why any of this stuff is happening. I got nothing for you. Yeah. That's interesting.
Alabama fans don't like parody. I mean, they right. They don't like interesting, Michael. I mean, you used that word earlier. They don't like it. They like boring games. They like boring outcomes and blowouts as long as they're raising the trophy.
During the regular season. But look, like, I don't think there is somebody who is – let's forget Alabama. I don't even think there's a program in college football right now that's the equivalent of Clemson during their peak at the end of the 2010s. Like, I don't think there's anybody that looks that consistently good in college football right now.
It's the talent. I mean, it's just, the talent is spread out. It's not the teams have not been able to hoard the talent the way they've been able to in the past. It's like the NIL has been the great equalizer. I know Saban said that it was going to is going to just make the rich richer, but I don't think it has.
But you're a Yankee fan, Michael, right? Like, I mean, the Yankees, I mean, without obviously we know who they are and like how much they've been able to win. They stockpile talent. They try to compete, and it's been a struggle for them, admittedly, since 2009. But I mean, with Alabama, to me, in Clemson, you mentioned there, Matt, like it's two different types of college football. There's two different products where you have all this parity and anybody can beat anybody, and that is interesting, right? And there's chaos, and you just kind of want to see what happens. And that's the NFL. Basically, right? I mean, like Kansas City's probably going to be there. Buffalo's probably going to be there. But like 1 year it could be Philadelphia. 1 year it could be San Francisco. 1 year it could be Cincinnati, right? You never truly know who's going to end up being in the Super Bowl. But back during that era you're talking about, especially during kind of like the peak of the college football playoff when it was Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State and these same teams over and over, you're still getting the best possible college football because all of the talent is on those teams. And I think that even though you got all of these Alabama Clemson rematches, you're still getting the best possible game that you could get. It's going to be exciting because the best players and the best coaches are adversaries in those circumstances. But I guess people do get bored of that, even if it's the best possible football product that you can give them.
Yeah, for the most part, you get to Santa Clara in 2018. I don't know if that was the best college football game. But yeah, I mean that's a fair way of looking at it. But I like chaos. Like I'm a chaos agent. I'm here for excitement.
Well, it's like the Avengers, Michael. Like if the Avengers are like, we'll get into the analogy a little bit later on. I can explain it a little bit better to you.
Scripted, maybe it's on WWE. Like it was more fun when it was scripted. It was sports entertainment, but now it's like they've thrown the script out, and it's not fun now. I think I love it. Sorry, guys.
Well, it's Alabama LSU. We're used to that, but I mean, it's a little bit more of a chaotic feeling this year than it has been in the past. I don't think we have any idea what's going to happen on Saturday. But I'm not going to ask for like a score prediction or anything from either of you guys right now. But what I will ask you is this. I'll put it this way, and I'll start with Michael. Will Alabama still be in the college football playoff picture after Saturday night?
You're saying is Alabama going to win?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
That's the thing. That truly is the thing. That's what makes this interesting is which Alabama shows up, which LSU shows up. There's really no telling. I mean, it says every one of these games. I mean, you look at the score picks of all of our AL.com, we're all about 500 on betting against the line, hypothetically. It is such a coin flip for all of these games. Like, I wish I could tell you.
But for all we know, 3 losses may still be enough to get into this college football. There's still a lot of season left.
There is.
I'm going to say it's not. I'm going to say 3 losses, you are out in
probably
this year. In a year when already the SEC has a lot of strong programs in it, and a win in this game would put LSU firmly above Alabama, obviously in that pecking order. Plus, I think the nightmare. Look, we don't really know, but I think the nightmare scenario for an also ran from a power conference is for there to be multiple really good group of 5 teams out there. And right now you're looking at Navy and Boise. I think the playoff committee is going to really want to put both of those teams in.
Army.
I'm sorry. Army, not Navy, but yes.
Do we want an Army BYU final in the college football playoff? Is that what we're talking about here?
Oh, I would pay for that triple option versus Boise and the running back. Oh, yeah.
How much would you pay for that, though? That's the question. Like, how much? But Matt,
it's going to be like the basketball tournament in as much as everybody's going to want to see the fun Cinderella teams get in, and then they're all going to get blown out. And we're all going to have the same exact Final Four that we would have had anyway. That's what I think is going to happen.
Chalk. Matt, Michael hedged on my very well disguised question about the outcome of this game. What do you think? I mean, is Alabama still in the picture after Saturday night?
I know this is a Bama podcast, and I don't want to get people to tune out. I'm still a little pessimistic about, let's say skeptical, not pessimistic, about this Alabama team right now and their ability to go on the road in a tough environment. Okay, they couldn't do it at Vandy. I am skeptical about the ability of this offense to execute on the road right now. We'll see what happens, and they looked like they were showing progress against Missouri. If they can maintain that trajectory, then it's a different ball game. But I need to see before I believe. I am doubting Thomas here about Alabama. I want to believe in you, Alabama, but I got to see it before I believe it.
Nashville's a hard place to play. Nick Saban was wrong, obviously. And why don't you ask Auburn what happens when Vandy comes into your house? Okay.
Look,
not an easy team.
I think we can at least all admit this year that Diego Pavia is a force of nature, and that everybody in the SEC will be glad when they never have to see him again. What an absolute nightmare that guy is.
He's arguably the most impactful player in the SEC since maybe Joe Burrow and Cam Newton. Not saying he's as good as them, but you take him away and they're regular Vanderbilt.
Absolutely. Incredible player.
All right. That should do it. He's AL.com college football writer Michael Casagrande. He's Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Thanks for doing this, guys. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, review. We appreciate it. I'm Ben Flanagan. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.